Welcome back to Gambling Flow, your daily dose of all things gambling. I'm Russell Kane.
And I'm Fiona Blake.
Today we're taking a deep dive into the history of gambling in the U.S. It's a wild ride full of surprising twists and turns, so buckle up.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see how something we often take for granted, like casinos or sports betting, has such deep roots stretching back thousands of years.
Thousands of years.
Mhm.
Let's start by rewinding the clock all the way back to ancient civilizations like Egypt, China, and Greece. We're talking 2000 BC, where people were already rolling dice, those little cubes of chance.
You know what's interesting is that the earliest dice were known as knuckle bones, and they were actually made from sheep bones. It just shows how gambling was woven into everyday life using common materials for games of chance. Imagine just like we might flip a coin today, they were rolling bones to test their luck.
It's incredible how some things never change.
Right?
Speaking of things that never change, it turns out cheating is as old as gambling itself. They even found loaded dice in ancient tombs. Talk about trying to beat the system.
Absolutely. And speaking of adapting to restrictions, the Romans were quite clever. They faced legal constraints on gambling, so they came up with the first gambling chips to disguise their wagers from the authorities.
So those little plastic discs we use in casinos today have roots in ancient Rome. That's a fun fact to drop at the poker table.
Hmm.
But moving on from the Romans, what happened to gambling in the medieval period?
Well, it was a mixed bag. Some European countries embraced gambling while others outlawed it for religious reasons, sparking that age-old debate between personal freedom and moral concerns.
A debate that continues to this day.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Crusades? They seem like an unlikely setting for gambling.
You might be surprised. During the Crusades, gambling was actually allowed, but only for knights in the higher ranks, and they had strict limits on how much they could lose, almost like an early form of responsible gaming.
I guess they didn't want their knights going bankrupt before battle. But here's a fascinating connection. The Crusades actually played a role in the development of thoroughbred racehorses.
It's true. The Arabian horses brought back from the Crusades eventually led to the breeding of thoroughbreds, which became a huge betting pastime, particularly for the upper classes. They loved their horse races.
So from knucklebones to knights and now to horse racing,
Yeah.
it seems like gambling has always found a way to adapt and evolve.
Mm-hmm.
What other forms of gambling were popular during that time?
Well, card games started gaining traction in Europe around the late 14th century. We have early versions of Baccarat from that era, believe it or not.
Wow.
And then there were lotteries popping up in the late 15th and early 16th centuries. They were a clever way to fund public projects back then.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Governments have always been good at finding ways to raise money, even if it involves a little bit of chance.
Right.
But before we get to colonial America,
Hmm.
I'm curious about the Native American gambling traditions. They had their own games of chance, right?
Absolutely. Long before the colonists arrived, Native Americans had their own gambling traditions, playing games with dice and bowls. Some historians even see these as early precursors to modern slot machines. It's fascinating to see how these games evolved and influenced later forms of gambling.
So when the European colonists showed up, they brought their own love of gambling adding to the mix. What were some of the popular forms back then?
Well, horse racing, of course, remained a favorite, but they also had cockfighting. And even something called bull baiting, which was pretty brutal, to be honest.
It's amazing how tastes and sensitivities change over time. What about lotteries? Did the colonists continue that tradition?
Oh, absolutely. Lotteries played a key role in funding infrastructure development in colonial America. In fact, the very first official lottery in England was established way back in 1567 by Queen Elizabeth I herself.
Yeah.
Talk about a royal stamp of approval.
But not everyone was on board with the gambling craze, right? Didn't the arrival of the Pilgrims and Puritans change things a bit?
It definitely shifted the landscape. They had a strict work ethic and viewed gambling as sinful. This led to greater opposition and tighter restrictions on certain forms of gambling.
Their influence can still be felt in American culture today, even though gambling is much more widespread now. But despite their efforts, some places just couldn't resist the allure of a good gamble. New Orleans, for example, became quite the gambling hub in the 18th and 19th centuries, didn't it?
New Orleans was a fascinating case. Even when gambling was officially outlawed, it thrived underground. And we can't forget the legendary riverboat gamblers plying their trade on the Mississippi. That's where games like poker and craps really took off in America.
It's almost like the Mississippi River itself was a symbol of risk and reward. But the tide was turning once again, wasn't it? Didn't religious movements begin to push back against gambling's growing popularity?
Yes, the 18th and 19th centuries saw waves of evangelical Christianity sweeping across America. They saw gambling as a moral threat, putting pressure on lawmakers to crack down. However, even the Civil War couldn't stop the need for funds, leading to a temporary revival of lotteries.
It's interesting how even during times of moral crusades, practical needs often win out. And I have to admit, I'm particularly fascinated by the Wild West era. Gambling seemed like a way of life back then.
The Wild West was a gambler's paradise. Saloons and gambling houses were everywhere, and legendary figures like Bat Masterson, Poker Alice, and of course Wild Bill Hickok roamed the frontier. It was a time of boomtowns outlaws and high-stakes poker games.
Wild Bill Hickok shot dead while holding the dead man's hand, aces and eights. What a story. But all that Wild West freedom was about to change. Events across the ocean in Victorian England would have a big impact on American morals.
You're right. Queen Victoria's emphasis on morality and conservative values trickled across the pond, leading to a decline in gambling's popularity in the late 19th century. By the early 20th century, the U.S. was on the verge of a nationwide crackdown.
Yeah, that crackdown on gambling in the early 20th century really reshaped the landscape. Most forms of gambling were outlawed, leaving just a few legal options like horse racing in certain states. So it was back underground for the gamblers. A bit like the Prohibition era, with speakeasies and hidden gambling dens. But as we know, you can't keep a good gambler down for long.
Yeah.
Where did the comeback begin?
Nevada, of all places.
Yeah.
In 1931, right in the thick of the Great Depression, they decided to take a gamble on legalized casino gambling.
It seems counterintuitive to legalize something often seen as a vice during an economic crisis. What drove them to that decision?
Well, they were desperate for an economic boost, and they had a unique set of circumstances that made gambling seem like a viable option. You know, they'd loosened their divorce laws, attracting people from all over who needed to establish residency. And the construction of the Hoover Dam brought in thousands of workers with money to spend.
So loose laws, a massive influx of people, and an economic downturn created the perfect conditions for a gambling revival. But Nevada wasn't exactly known for its glitz and glamour back then. How did that transformation happen?
Yeah, those early gambling halls in Reno were pretty rough around the edges, catering mainly to cowboys and frontiersmen. It wasn't until Las Vegas entered the scene that Nevada started to cultivate a more glamorous image.
Ah, Las Vegas, the city of sin. When did it start its journey to becoming the entertainment capital we know today?
The first gambling licenses were issued in Las Vegas in 1931, but the real turning point came in 1941 with the opening of El Rancho Vegas, the first major casino on what we now call the Strip. It was a game changer, drawing in tourists and celebrities alike.
El Rancho Vegas. The name itself evokes images of old Hollywood glamour. But even with this new wave of sophistication, I imagine there was still a strong undercurrent of organized crime in those early days.
You're absolutely right. The mob saw the potential of Las Vegas and quickly moved into it. Prohibition had just ended, so they were looking for new ways to make money, and gambling seemed like the perfect opportunity.
It sounds like something straight out of a classic gangster movie. Which infamous mobster was it who really set his sights on Vegas?
None other than Bugsy Siegel. He arrived in the 1940s bringing mob money with him and poured millions into a lavish new casino called the Flamingo. It was intended to be the ultimate symbol of luxury and sophistication, attracting high rollers from all over.
The Flamingo. It certainly has a glamorous ring to it. Did it live up to the hype?
Ironically, it was a flop at first. Bugsy's lavish spending and delays in construction caused tension with his mob associates, leading to his untimely demise. You could say he was a victim of his own ambition.
A classic tale of mob violence ambition gone wrong. But even with Bugsy out of the picture, the Flamingo marked a turning point for Las Vegas, didn't it?
Absolutely. It ushered in an era of big money and even bigger ambitions, setting the stage for Vegas's meteoric rise as a global entertainment destination.
So from rough-and-tumble gambling halls to mob-run casinos and the beginnings of the Las Vegas Strip, it seems like Nevada was on a roller coaster ride in the first half of the 20th century. What happened after World War II? Did things settle down a bit?
Not at all. The post-war era brought a surge in tourism, and Las Vegas was perfectly positioned to capitalize on it. People were ready to let loose and have some fun, and Vegas, with its glamorous casinos and exciting entertainment, was the ideal playground.
Showgirls, Rat Pack performances, and the allure of striking it rich at the roulette table. Vegas had it all.
Yeah.
But I imagine the state of Nevada wasn't just sitting back and enjoying the show. They must have realized the need to regulate this burgeoning industry.
You're right. They were quick to recognize the potential tax revenue that gambling could generate, and they started taking steps to legitimize and control the industry. In the 1940s, they began collecting gaming taxes, and in 1955, they created the Nevada Gaming Control Board. A few years later, in 1959, the Nevada Gaming Commission was established. These were crucial steps in bringing some order to the Wild West of gambling.
So Vegas was transitioning from a mob-run town to a more legitimate, albeit still exciting, tourist destination. Were there any key figures who played a role in this shift?
One individual stands out. Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire. He moved to Las Vegas in the 1960s and started buying up casinos on the Strip, including the iconic Desert Inn. His arrival shook things up, to say the least. The mob wasn't exactly thrilled about this outsider encroaching on their turf.
Howard Hughes, the reclusive aviator and filmmaker buying up casinos.
Oh.
That's quite a twist. Did he back down in the face of mob pressure?
Not a chance. Hughes doubled down, investing even more heavily in Vegas. He envisioned a future where the city would be a global entertainment hub, and he was determined to make it happen.
And his gamble paid off, didn't it? Vegas did become the entertainment capital of the world. What about the mob? Did they just fade into the background?
Not without a fight, but Hughes's presence, along with some key changes in Nevada law, made it much harder for them to operate. In 1967, the state made it easier for corporations to own and operate casinos, further legitimizing the industry and pushing out the mob's influence. It was the beginning of a new era for Las Vegas.
So Las Vegas was evolving, becoming more corporate but also more accessible to a wider audience. What was happening in the rest of the country? Were other states starting to consider the potential of legalized gambling?
It was a slow process, but attitudes were starting to change. In the early 1970s, a major study by the Commission on the Review of the National Policy Toward Gambling found that a whopping 80% of American adults had no moral objections to gambling, and 67% actually participated in some form of gambling.
Those are some pretty surprising statistics, especially given the historical opposition to gambling. Did those findings have any impact on gambling laws?
They did. The Commission's report, Gambling in America, published in 1976, recommended that states should have the freedom to set their own gambling policies without federal interference. This paved the way for the expansion of gambling beyond Nevada.
So which state was brave enough to break the Nevada monopoly?
Atlantic City, New Jersey. In 1978, they opened the first legal casino outside of Nevada, marking a major turning point in U.S. gambling history. They saw the potential economic benefits and decided to take the plunge.
Atlantic City, with its iconic boardwalk and beachfront casinos, became a popular gambling destination in its own right. Did other states follow suit?
They did, but it was a gradual process. By the mid-1990s, 9 more states had joined the party. Colorado, Illinois, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, Mississippi, South Dakota, Missouri, and Louisiana Gambling was slowly but surely becoming more acceptable across the country.
It's amazing how perceptions can change over time. What was once seen as a vice was gradually becoming embraced as a legitimate form of entertainment and a source of revenue.
Exactly. And this brings us to another fascinating chapter in U.S. gambling history, Native American gambling.
Right. Their story is one of resilience and a fight for their rights. How did their journey into the gambling world begin?
It started with bingo halls on tribal lands in the 1970s. These quickly gained popularity and attracted players from all over, but they also faced legal challenges.
So bingo, the seemingly harmless game often associated with church basements and retirement homes, was at the heart of a major legal battle.
Exactly. State governments saw these bingo halls as competition and tried to shut them down. But the Native American tribes argued that their sovereign status as independent nations exempted them from state gambling laws.
That's a bold legal argument that is held up in court.
After years of legal battles, the U.S. Supreme Court finally sided with the tribes in a landmark case involving California. They ruled that tribal gambling activities were not subject to state law, opening the door for a major expansion of Native American casinos.
That must have been a huge victory for the tribes. What happened next?
In 1988, Congress passed the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, officially recognizing the right of Native American tribes to operate casinos on their reservations, as long as those casinos were located in states where some form of gambling was already legal. This led to a boom in Native American gambling, which has become a major force in the industry today.
It's an incredible story of perseverance and a testament to their determination to control their own destinies. They transformed humble bingo halls into sprawling casino resorts, creating jobs and economic opportunities for their communities. But now I'm curious about the online gambling revolution. That's a relatively recent phenomenon, isn't it?
It is, and it's completely transformed the way people gamble. The mid-1990s saw the birth of the first online casinos, and by the end of the decade, hundreds of gambling websites were popping up all over the internet.
It sounds like the Wild West all over again, this time in the digital realm. I imagine things were pretty unregulated those early days.
It was a bit of a free-for-all at first, but the potential of this new market was undeniable, and online gambling quickly grew into a multi-billion-dollar industry.
So everyone embraced this new digital frontier, right? No legal hurdles or pushback from the government.
Not quite. The U.S. government had a rather complicated relationship with online gambling. While other countries like Great Britain embraced and regulated it, the U.S. took a different approach.
Why was that? Were there concerns about problem gambling or moral objections?
There were those concerns, of course, but many believe that the U.S. government was also heavily influenced by the powerful lobby of land-based casinos who saw online gambling as a threat to their profits.
Ah, the classic battle between old money and new technology. How did the government try to restrict online gambling?
In 2006, they passed the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, or UIGA, making it illegal for banks and credit card companies to process payments from U.S. customers to online gambling sites.
That must have been a major setback for the industry. Did it kill it off completely?
It certainly slowed things down. Many
Yeah.
online casinos stopped accepting U.S. players, and the industry faced an uncertain future. But as we know, online gambling is alive and well today, so something must have changed.
You're right. What was the turning point?
That change came in the form of a landmark Supreme Court ruling in 2018.
A Supreme Court case. This sounds intriguing. What was at stake?
It involved the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992, or PASPA, which effectively banned sports betting nationwide, except in a few states like Nevada.
So it was a case about sports betting, not online gambling in general.
Correct. But the Supreme Court's decision to strike down PASPA had huge implications for the entire gambling landscape, online gambling included.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat. What does the Supreme Court decide?
They ruled that PASPA was unconstitutional, giving individual states the right to legalize sports betting if they chose to do so. This decision opened the floodgates for a whole new era of gambling in America.
So the legalization of sports betting was the key that unlocked the door for online gambling as well.
Exactly. With the federal ban on sports betting gone, states were free to explore all sorts of new gambling options, including online casinos and poker rooms, and they were eager to do so given the potential for increased tax revenue.
And I imagine the online gambling industry was more than happy to oblige.
Absolutely. In the years since that Supreme Court ruling, we've seen a rapid expansion of online gambling across the U.S. It's become a massive industry, offering convenience, variety, and accessibility that traditional casinos simply can't match.
It's amazing how one court case can have such a ripple effect, changing the entire landscape of an industry. But where do things stand today? Is online gambling legal everywhere in the U.S.?
Not yet. As of today, there are still some states that are holding out, but the trend is definitely towards legalization. And with the industry booming, it's only a matter of time before online gambling becomes as commonplace as going to a movie or a concert.
We've come a long way from those ancient dice games and smoky backroom poker dens, haven't we? It's been quite a journey through the history of gambling in the U.S.
It has, and it's a story that's still unfolding. The world of gambling is constantly evolving, and there are sure to be more twists and turns ahead. Who knows what innovations and challenges await us?
I'm eager to see what the future holds. But for now, let's move on to the modern gambling landscape in part 3 of our deep dive into this fascinating world. So we've covered a lot of ground, from those ancient dice games to the rise of Las Vegas and the birth of online gambling, and now we're in this modern era of gambling. It's fascinating to see how far it's come.
It really is. And speaking of how far it's come, the American Gaming Association reported a record $53 billion in revenue for 2021.
That's a staggering figure.
It is, and it really reflects how the industry has not only recovered from the pandemic, but actually thrived in some ways. I mean, the temporary closures of land-based casinos during those uncertain times really accelerated the shift towards online gambling.
Yeah, people were stuck at home looking for ways to entertain themselves, and online casinos offered that convenience and accessibility. I mean, they were right there.
They were. And even now, as things are returning to normal, the demand for online gambling doesn't seem to be waning. Not at all. Online gambling has become a major force in the industry, and its popularity is only expected to grow. It offers a level of convenience, variety, and accessibility that traditional casinos simply can't match.
Right. And it seems like with advancements in technology, the online gambling experience is just getting better and better.
Absolutely. We're seeing incredible graphics, immersive gameplay, and innovative features that are blurring the lines between the virtual and real world. Live dealer games, virtual reality casinos, and even augmented reality experiences are becoming increasingly common. It's an exciting time to be a gambler, that's for sure.
It is. Speaking of exciting, we can't forget about the impact of sports betting. The Supreme Court's decision to overturn PSPA in 2018 was a monumental shift, opening up a whole new market for both land-based and online sportsbooks.
It really was a game changer. States are rushing to legalize sports betting, eager to tap into that potential tax revenue. And fans are loving it. They can now legally bet on their favorite teams and players, adding an extra layer of excitement to the games.
It's incredible. It's amazing how quickly sports betting has become integrated into the mainstream. We see sports betting ads everywhere, and it's even a regular topic of conversation on sports talk shows. It's as if gambling has lost its stigma and become this widely accepted form of entertainment.
I think to a large extent it has. But I think it's also important to remember that with this rapid growth comes a responsibility to ensure that gambling remains safe and enjoyable for everyone.
That's a good point. Responsible gambling is more important than ever. With so many new ways to gamble, it's crucial that people have access to resources and support if they need it.
Exactly. Gambling should always be about fun and entertainment, not about chasing losses or trying to make a quick buck. We need to ensure that people understand the risks involved and know where to turn for help if they need it.
Well said. We've come a long way from those ancient dice games and smoky backroom poker dens, haven't we? It's been quite a journey exploring the history of gambling in the U.S.
It really has, and I think it's a story that's still unfolding. The world of gambling is constantly evolving, and there are sure to be more twists and turns ahead. Who knows what innovations and challenges await us?
I'm eager to see what the future holds. But for now, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. I'm Russell Kane.
And I'm Tiona Blake.
Thanks for joining us on Gambling Flow, your daily dose of all things gambling. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends. And as always, gamble responsibly.